All right, we're going to get started here. Welcome, everybody. I'm Greg Zipfel, and I'm one of the leaders of the K12 program. And if you haven't been on this before, we have a webinar that we do every 2 months. If you go to the NRCDP K12 website, it'll talk about what the topics are, who the speakers will be, and what we're planning for the year. I'm happy that you've joined us. If you, just so you know, if you missed part of this, or you'd like to review some of this, or someone that you know missed this tonight and would like to hear about it, we always post these. They're taped and posted as well. So that's another way that people can see what's talked about today. So thanks for making it tonight. The leader of our discussion will be Dr. Rolston, John Rolston, who's at Brigham. He's well, I guess MGB now. Sorry, he's sorry. He's at MGB. I got to get used to that. But he's the director of epilepsy surgery and director of the Mapping and Engineering Neurodynamics Laboratory, and associate professor at Harvard Medical School, previously at the University of Utah, and has been a K-12 awardee and has been involved for quite some time. He wrote a really nice article a couple of years ago on how to negotiate for a career in particular for a neurosurgeon scientist. And so we invited him to lead a panel in the past, and we've invited him again tonight since it was so well received. So John, I will turn it over to you, and you can introduce the topic and your panelists. So thanks for doing that.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me. I'll do a worse job this time, so you don't invite me back. Maybe. Just kidding. So let me share my slides here. Okay. So the way I'll start is I have a few about how to think about protected time, and then we'll move over to what I thought would be fun is a discussion amongst some other neurosurgeon scientists who I think are all just really excelling and top of their game, to get their idea for how they're doing it. And I have some questions that can kind of get the discussion rolling. But luckily, I was really able or I was able to convince people like Dr. Doris Wong from UCSF, a good friend of mine, to be present tonight, along with her child, one of them, and then also Dario Englot, who also has one of his kids from Vanderbilt, and then Dr. Bernali Kundu, who is my former fellow, who's now in Missouri with also one of her children. My children are upstairs, so you can't see them. And then Sean Hervey Jumper, who I don't think you brought your kids to work, but if they're hiding somewhere, you can bring them out too. So here, just some kind of general overview ideas about this. So first, what do we mean when we're talking about protected time? So if you're maybe more junior in your journey through neurosurgery, what we're thinking about is time for what we kind of think of research. So when you're as a clinical neurosurgeon, you are obligated to do a lot of work clinically to take care of patients, to see them in the operating room, in the clinic, before and after, to help do things to build your practice and to take care of those pipelines of patients, whether that's tumor boards or epilepsy conferences. But you need some sort of time to, aside from that, to conduct research. So a formal definition might be something like designated portion of your work schedule free of clinical revenue generating obligations. So time where you can actually focus on being in the lab, mentoring people, or doing that kind of work. That's also a critical part of your academic career. This is measured in different ways, and there's a couple units that are relevant. So one is FTEs. And you may not have heard about this if you're kind of newer in the game, but that is short for full-time equivalents. That ranges from 0 to 1. So one FTE means like 100% of your time. A half FTE would be 50% of your time, and so on. So this is more relevant when you're talking to people like in the department or business side of the hospital. That's the terminology they'll use. Grant mechanisms will sometimes use different terminologies like calendar months. So the NIH will often refer to your effort in terms of calendar months. So you might devote 3 months to an R01, 3 calendar months to an R01, for instance, or 6 for a K23, for instance. But those two are basically getting to the same thing. The VA has this eighths mechanism. So 4/8 would be half and 5/8 and so on. Again, why do you need this protected time? You need time to do a lot of that work that's involved in research. So here's actually my day today. This is my calendar schedule. I kind of pulled it in. So this morning I had before work at a parent-teacher conference, which doesn't really count for research, but I needed time to do that. We had a journal club across our center at 9 o'clock. At 10 o'clock, we had a new grant that we had a kickoff meeting for. We had a joint lab meeting at 11 o'clock. From noon to 2, I had a scientific advisory board that I was on. From 2 to 2:30, I had a biweekly meeting with one of my RAs. 2:30 to 3, I had another parent-teacher conference virtually, luckily. Then I had a weekly meeting with my lab manager. Then I had a clinical trial meeting. And then now at 8 p.m., we have this webinar. So as you can see, this is like a lot of stuff that happens and part of doing this, the research side of things. And you need time to do all that. That's separate from the time that you're in the OR. If I was in the OR today, I wouldn't have been able to do most of this stuff. There's also things like going to conferences, reviewing papers. There's just a lot of work that goes into doing this academic stuff, and you need physical time to do that. This is also kind of an investment in the institution in you as a researcher. So by virtue of them dedicating some portion of your time to be protected research time, they are acknowledging that this is an important sort of they're basically having this opportunity cost of not having you in the operating room, not having you seeing patients, and they're willing to do that because they believe in you. That what you're going to do in research is important enough to forego that extra revenue they could be generating. So that's a big sort of stamp of like, trust in you. And that's good to have. And that shows that they actually that they mean that. If they don't give you the protected time, they might not have that confidence, or at least aren't showing it. Another reason you might need this is that some grant agencies like the NIH require a formal commitment of protected time. So for instance, the K12, the NINDS K23 or K08 all require a 50% protected research time for you. So you need to have your boss write that in some sort of formal document when you submit those applications. Kind of getting into some of the other things that might be important to this. Just quickly, I think this is important to like how you would justify your protected time or how you're going to argue for it. Part of it's going to come down to money. So your compensation as a neurosurgeon is going to be one number. The MGMA salary I looked up before this was around very generous 962,000, which is probably more than many academic people might make. And that's linked to clinical productivity. So how much money you're generating into the hospital and things like RVUs, billings. Researcher compensation is often more derived from grant support or teaching or endowments or grant funding. And you are both as an academic scientist, so an academic neurosurgeon. And so kind of, back to this idea of like, if you have a chair, for instance, Matt Damon, chair of the new neurosurgery program we're going to start, and you get some sort of salary, if your clinical revenue is higher than that salary, that is very good. And your chairperson, like Matt Damon in this case, would be very happy with you. If your salary was one number and your revenue was much lower, that will make a less happy neurosurgery chair. So you want to be in a position where you are making either more than you're making more money to pay your salary, or you have some way to balance that shortfall. And so when you're doing this, if you have this shortfall, if you're doing less kind of time in the operating room and more time doing research, more of that protected time, how do you justify that? Grant funding is one way. So the more successful you are in grant money, you can offset that salary, which is great. But you have to acknowledge that the NIH salary cap is much lower than that MGMA average salary. So even if you're like 50% FTE on NIH grants, that's maximum of $112,000 for direct salary support. So there's still going to be some differential there. Philanthropic funding can get a lot of extra support for you. The hospital itself can give you things like endowments or directorships to support stuff. If there's still some gap, and there almost always is, you need to justify what value the department is getting by still giving you that time away from the more remunerative clinical part of things. So they might want something for that. They might want high profile publications. They might want the indirect fees from your grants, which are really big in a lot of cases. So maybe less in the future, depending on how the government shakes out with the NIH indirect fees. But But those sort of things that they're getting are something that is important for you to understand as you're trying to justify why you need this extra time. How much protected time do you need? One way to do this is kind of like working backward, thinking, if I want to be in the OR for 2 days a week and I need patients to fill that up, how much clinic time do I need to do? And then how much time would I have left over for research? Try to like, kind of game that out in your head. What sort of schedule might work best for you to do all these things. Again, for grants like the K08 or K23, you need 50% research time protected. At the NINDS, at other institutes, it's actually more. If you're a neurologist, it's also more than if you're a neurosurgeon. The NINDS is a neurosurgery cutout for us. Some quick ways to might try to protect that time are things like, scheduling your research. So on your calendar, having a block of like, 5 hours to like review grants or do something or whatever sort of time you need, so that you are not going to schedule patients, you're not going to schedule OR. That is just a time that is sacrosanct for research. You can use your APPs, your advanced practice providers, your fellows, other people to work at the best of their licenses to help you out too. So you don't have to do all this alone. Again, everyone wants you to succeed and wants your practice to succeed. So they're going to do their best to help you. And then the last part of it, which is it's hard to do at the beginning, but gets easier over time, is to say no to things. So that people are going to ask you to be on committees, ask you to edit collections of articles or other things like that. And it's okay at some point to say, no, you have too much clinical responsibilities or you have too much research responsibilities. You need to focus on what you're doing. So that's kind of like a, just preamble with some slides there. But I think the more fun part of this would be some discussions amongst all the great people we have here. So I'll stop sharing my slides and maybe ask some leading questions here. So maybe starting with Doris. So what's your protected time breakdown right now? How would you say it looks practically?
Practically,
Yeah. What
my
is it on
only
paper and what is it in real life?
on paper, 50%. In real life, probably like 10%, if
Yeah.
that.
10% research?
Yes, 10% research.
Yeah.
So yeah, it evolved over time. In the beginning, when I first, got my job, I wasn't clinically busy. So I had like more like felt like 70% time for research, 30% clinical. But as time evolved and practice changed, now I'm definitely overextended on the clinical front and then fit in research kind of whenever I can.
Yeah. Do you have any strategies you're using now to like help make the most of that time that you do have for research? Anything that you're doing to maximize that?
Yeah, great question. I think as time has gone on, I've become a lot more efficient at doing things like writing grants, reading papers. So that definitely cuts down the amount of time, or maybe I'm just a better procrastinator now. And then nights and weekends. And I think one thing is like proximity of my office slash lab to the OR. So, UCSF campuses are spread all over, but, my main practice for DBS movement is at Parnassus. My office is just like down the hallway. So yeah, in between cases, I can meet with people, my lab people, when there's a slow turnover, which is, happens at UCSF quite a lot. I use that time to like catch up on email, do admin research. And then unfortunately, the reality is like nights and weekends, like for all my grant writing, since these two were born, happens between the hours of like 10 p.m. and 4 a.m.
Yeah.
Painful, but yes.
Yeah. And Sean, you've been at this for a while. So what do you think your breakdown is now? And then what was it when you first started compared to now?
Yeah. Listen, this it evolves, right? And it's funny, it's so awesome to see you guys with your little ones. I just dropped my oldest off at college
Oh
like
my,
a couple of weeks ago, right? So um it goes quick. So yes, maybe you are writing late at night, but it's okay. Enjoy them now. My current setup is pretty regimented actually. I've gone through probably 4 or 5 different iterations, but right now, after years of just like trying to figure out what works and what doesn't work, I noticed if I had a rotating schedule, all the people in my life, whether it's professionally or personally, were kind of like hungry for where is Sean? Like, where is he? Is he coming? Is he not? Is he home? Is he not? So I actually have my schedule is very regimented. Monday and Tuesday I'm in the operating room. Wednesday I'm in clinic. Thursday, Friday are lab. But in that I meet with everybody in my lab on Mondays. Those Monday meetings may be 5 minutes, they may be 45 minutes, but we will all have a face-to-face meeting either by Zoom or in person. And the conversation is like, what's your plan for the week? What are you prioritizing? What do you need from me? And these are like the couple things or one thing that I might need from you. But it's that conversation up front about how the week is going to start. And I fit that in between cases. So it usually starts at about 6:37 is the first one. For anyone who's okay with an early rise, and we do that until first start, which, as Doris politely said, is probably about 8:30 by the time we're ready to actually do the operation. And then again in between cases for the 2 hours in between, and then usually at the end of the day. So I won't finish my day until like probably 8:39, even though the cases will probably end around 6. And so my family just knows Monday and Tuesday I'll be home by bed, but probably won't be home for dinner. Thursdays are like lab meetings and other collaborative meetings, and Friday's largely a writing day. I don't write papers and grants on the same day anymore. Usually I usually separate them out. This is either a grant writing day or a paper writing day, but I largely write on Fridays with like rare exceptions.
Yeah.
But I don't know that you want to bore you with all the iterations that I've gone through to get to that point. But that's what seems to work. And I've had that for probably the last 4 or 5 years.
And then for the meetings you have on Monday, are they kind of loosely scheduled? So you tell the people like, okay, sometime around like 11 a.m. I might be calling you, or like how do you arrange that? Because you know the first case might be unpredictable when it stops.
Yeah, so everyone has a block, but you're right. Everyone knows it's their block plus or minus 2 hours on either end.
Mhm.
And they know this coming in, right? We discuss these things when they join the lab.
Mhm.
So it's no surprise to folks when they get.
And then do you have any sort of standing obligations that can like that bleed into other days, like tumor board meetings or other sort of like academic requirements for like program director stuff or other things that just kind of will go into that Thursday or go into that Friday that it's otherwise dedicated to more research stuff?
Yeah, so I've suffered through 5 years of medical director, and during that point, I scheduled my medical director work on the tail end of clinic. So I usually finish my clinic at around 3 p.m., 3 to 4 p.m., and did all the medical director work that I could fit in, while I was in clinic, kind of like fit nicely there. Now, as program director now, I have about a 3 hour standing block on Thursday mornings for that.
Mhm.
So grand rounds and then program director stuff as much as you can. Obviously, things happen, but there's a block set for it, and anything that's not emergent goes into those blocks. Uh, and everyone knows that I'll handle it once we get to that block of time, unless it's an emergency.
That's great. Yeah. Right, Bernali. So you just started, and then so what's your schedule now? And did you have to negotiate that, or was that something that was really easy to get as you were building your contract?
Yeah, well, it actually, I was really fortunate because I was pretty clear that I wanted to be a physician scientist. So it's basically written in my contract, like 50% research time. And my RVU goals are like half of what, the full-time clinical people's are. And my schedule is accordingly. It's I do research Monday, operate Tuesday, clinic Wednesday with like grand rounds admin, research Thursday, OR Friday. And I have the same schedule, kind of like Sean said, it does help my lab people and my secretary and like schedulers know, like if I just have the same schedule, they just know where I'm going to be and they can intercept me if needed. I think that's been helpful. And because it's written in my contract, then all the hospital admin are fine with it and I don't actually have to justify anything. And it's it's somewhat tracked because I mean if I do take like right now I'm trying to study for boards and I'm not operating and people have asked like, well, what are you doing with your time? And it's like, well, I operated 4 days a week like for the last 3 weeks, so just check my BI power
Yeah.
board or whatever. So that's how it's worked out.
Yeah. If you did, let's say, is there any sort of way that you either keep yourself accountable to that or the hospital does or a department in the sense that it's easy, I found as a new attending to get lured into like wanting to do as many cases as possible and like wanting to be totally available. Do you have any way to push back on that tendency to make sure that you reserve time for the research? Or does anyone like sort of mentor you in that?
Yeah. I think I did that a lot, especially my first year. I had like to write this K12, but then I had like all these cases. So I realized that I do need time to write. And so I also schedule in time to write, and I just do only that. And I've told like schedulers, like, no, you can't like fit in one more thing into this hour. I really am not available. So it's been sort of an evolving thing. But yeah, of course, and I was on call a lot more when I first started for a lot of different things like tumor and whatnot. And so then, yeah, then the tumor cases, elective, DBS, functional is nice because it's all elective and very like predictable, but you throw in like call, like, yeah, that will take up my whole research day. And then everyone's wondering where I am all day. So I did that a lot and everyone was upset. So that I tried to be better at it.
There, Dario, what's your schedule like?
Thanks, John. First, thanks for doing this. Appreciate it. It's also good to see you, Bornali and Doris and Sean. And thanks, Greg, for your leadership. I appreciate this opportunity. I think it's um, an interesting question. So we don't really have I feel like the idea of protected time is kind of centered on medicine subspecialties, like this protected time, definition. So, but I do think we define how much operative and clinic time we have, and then the rest of the time is what we make for it. So, I have 2 OR days, half a day clinic. So I save 2.5 days of time for research and administrative stuff. And we don't, you know, our finance is basically an RVU system. So it basically means you are, reducing the RVU compensation you get with a little bit of negotiation for rewarding academic time. But I think that's from my standpoint. I think you just schedule less OR and clinic time. My partners that are 100% clinical either do 4 days of OR and 1 day of clinic, or 3.5 and one and maybe half day of administrative. And I think you just have to obviously schedule much less than that. And I don't, it's not protected. Like if my patient who I did surgery on 2 weeks ago comes in with a infection, I'm not protected. I'm not going to not go treat that person. That. So I think our perspective as neurosurgeons is a little bit different than some other medical subspecialties. But you do have to just schedule much less clinical time as with OR and clinic to be able to have time left to do the research and the stuff we want to do.
Mhm. What about anyone's thoughts on the kind of research you might do? So do you think it's easier to do research that is with patients in the OR, where you're kind of like double dipping in terms of um, uh, like doing like microelectrode recording type experiments or something like that? So you're using clinical work and research work at the same time versus someone like Manish Aghi who has like a mouse lab,
Yeah.
which is very different. Um, any thoughts on like whether that's like if that's something that everyone should be comfortable doing or whether that's takes a special kind of resiliency to make work?
Personally, I think it's huge to be able to research your patients and have your patients be willing and excited participants for your research. I mean, it just makes everything work so much better. You know, we've talked about this before. I mean, I did my PhD in animal research, and would love to keep doing it, but it's just completely separate, and it just doesn't fit. So I think exactly like you said, there's many of our colleagues that do completely separate basic research and clinical practices. And I think it just takes even more time, like to be able to make that balance. And I think it's, for me personally, easier to have it super aligned and super connected.
Maybe, could I weigh in on this, John? Would that
Yeah,
be
please.
okay? Yeah, I think ideally do what John just or Dario just said. I mean, if you can do it that way, do it. And if you're a functional neurosurgeon, it usually works out great. It really. But if you're a vascular neurosurgeon, it doesn't work out so great. I mean, unless you're really doing something innovative with endovascular and, drug delivery to, whatever, something, or you're doing, what like Jay Amako is doing endovascular, BCI kind of stuff. I mean, occasionally you can find it, but there's just some subspecialties where it just doesn't work. So, if you're kind of subspecialty agnostic, my advice would be go into something where the patients are the research material, and that's for sure a more efficient, and frankly, in some ways, even you can make more progress because you're really the experiments are on patients, and the disease is the real disease rather than animal models, which has their limitations. But if your subspecialty area of passion and interest is not that, then you're going to have to find a different way. And my advice is to talk to people who are tumor people and how they do it, and vascular people and how they do it, or pediatric people and how they do it, things of that nature. So, but if you can align, it helps. That's for
And what about some models I've seen that have worked well is to pair someone with a PhD level researcher or someone who's not as clinically active to help more manage the day-to-day type things in the lab and help sort of extend your research ability. So people have like staff research scientists or just a PhD partner who they uh, go very successful careers with. It's obviously great if you happen to stumble upon something like that. You might not have the ability to, but um, have you seen anything like that work successfully amongst your peers, Sean, or um, anyone
Yeah.
else?
So, well, one of my early postdocs is has stayed on as a what is it in our system? It's an adjunct assistant professor. Yeah, adjunct assistant professor. Again, this is somebody who completed a postdoc, did not want to have their own independent lab because they like writing, they like working at the benchtop, and don't necessarily want to write grants, but also didn't want to work in industry. Enjoys the science, but doesn't need to lead the science, right? And so this person, they command a slightly higher salary and need the appropriate, promotion. So you need to be able to like help their career develop so they don't do cost a bit more, but it's huge. It allowed me to extend my lab from I was running maybe 6 or 7 people. Now I'm like 12 to 15. I think of them as like 3 teams of 3 to 4, right? They always have, there's a team whose paper's under revision and all hands on deck, a team who's starry eyed, new things that are being done, and a team who's about to submit. And I don't know that I could scale at that level if I didn't have a staff level person who could help with the teaching of the early people. That's really probably the biggest role is, teaching some of the folks who are new in the lab. But that didn't
Yeah.
come. That happened because I just so happened to have a postdoc once who, was looking for that. I don't think you can so much train that sort of person from the outset.
Mhm. And for support for that person, is that all from the funding that you're getting, so to support it off grants purely, or does the department kick in a little bit, recognizing the value of someone like that?
Oh no, no, no. My my dean said something once that I thought was really, really fun, and it was piggybacked. Eddie said the same thing. My chair said the same thing, and this was refreshing. So I'll just say it. They said, "Listen, as a neurosurgeon, you're doing research because you want to do it, not because the medical center wants you. So don't expect a gold star. Don't expect like it is cheaper for the university if a neurologist does the research that I do." Right. So I do it because I want to do it. And our department, like our chair, believes it's important, but like I don't expect some sort of university backstop for that sort of person or much support, internally for that person to run my lab. So philanthropic support and grant support. I submit an R1 every cycle. I feel like I'm about 1 in 6. So if I'm 1 in 6, 1 in 5, 1 in 6, and it just means I have to put in more grants. So I just write her into all of them.
Any with the like funding changes going on in
Hey,
the.
John, do you
Oh,
mind if I weigh in on that just a little bit?
yeah, please do. Yeah.
Yeah, I for someone who doesn't do research on my patients, a lot. I mean, occasionally something gets to an early phase clinical trial, but for the most part, I'm an animal, researcher. I think this PhD level person to help you run the day to day is critical. I mean, that's how Ralph Dacey did it. That's how T.S. Park did it. That's Dave Limbrick, who was at WashU for and now at VCU, did it that way. That's how they all have done it. Doesn't mean you have to do it that way. Albert Kim, who's at WashU, does not do it that way, so there's different ways of doing it. But I think it's a good model. My experience with it is you have to a couple of things. One is the timing of it. I don't think right out of the gates, unless you just got an amazing, just an incredibly generous startup offer, that's not the right time. You got to get a K award. You got to get some foundation grants. Probably, in my opinion, you probably need to be getting an R01 or you just got your R. Like that's the time where you might have the momentum. You may have the funding itself, or you may have partial funding, and you can go to your chair and say, you know what, I'm really doing well. I got my R01. I can cover 50%. Can you, cover the other 50% for the first 2 years while I'm, like it's that kind of thing to get the person. So I got mine, I think in year 4, maybe year 5, something along those lines. And it really helps a ton. But I did have to ask my boss for some support because this guy just kind of came upon and it was the right guy. And it was probably a little premature, but it was the right guy. I'm like, I just got to get this guy. And he and Ralph was supportive, and that really helped. So one is that's my thoughts about timing of it. And then I have some thoughts about the person you're looking for, because I've lived this 3 times and it's worked once. I mean, it worked for the long term once. The first 2 I got, they really wanted to be independent investigators. And they are great for about 2 years, and they help you and they help you. And no matter how much you tell them, their job is to help you. And over time, you can apply for your own grants. It's a clock, a clock goes off in their brain like, oh, it's been 2 years. It's now time for my stuff. And then you have a year to 2 years of pain trying to get them to do what you need them to do for their lab, helping them with their own grants, trying to get them their own funding because that's their goal. And my experience has been they really go off the rails in terms of the funded work, the stuff that's really paying the bills, which is your grants. And it's just a painful process to transition. And I've done that twice. Now I finally found somebody, and I've had them for quite a while, where it's the right person. And the difference was the third person did not want to be a principal investigator. It was kind of like what Sean said. That was the key. You want somebody who's smart, who wants to be doing research, is invigorated by what you're doing, believes in you, has a good personality, all the things that you're looking for, but they just don't want to be a PI. Now, you can't always find that person, but that's the ideal person, because the people who want to be PIs and they view this as a pathway towards them having their own lab. I tried it twice, and it was great for 2 years, and it was painful for the other 2 years while I was going through the transition. I did it twice, and I really would try to avoid that. Another way to do that would be, don't hire them on as a some sort of investigator, or not even like an assistant at our place, an assistant professor on the research track, to get rid of them if they're not working out, they're not doing what you need them to do. It's a 15-month process. Once you say it's over, it's still 15 months, So it's better to bring them on as like a senior scientist and let them prove themselves, that they are the person you think they are, that you are like-minded, you're going to work well together. That kind of position, at least at WashU, you can, if it's not working out, it's not a 15-month wait. So bringing them on in some sort of position where you can test them out, make sure it's working well, and then make a longer term commitment. Those are the lessons I've learned in my career about it that I thought I'd share.
Yeah, that was great. Yeah, so some additional thoughts on that is that the terminology for all these positions varies a lot from institution to institution, as do the regulations on timelines and reportability. So where I am now, there are limits to how long you are allowed to be a postdoc. So if you are a postdoc for more than 5 years, you have to find some sort of exit plan. You can't just be carried on. if you are hired on as this instructor level researcher, which is what kind of the position we're talking about, that is no longer a lab hire, that is a department hire. So in my case, I have to go to Nino and say, this is the person I want to hire. I have identified this pot of money, which will fund them for a minimum of 5 years to de-risk it. And now can we hire this person who will be working with me, but is now technically on paper reporting to you? So that's the sort of, it's not just something you can't decide unilaterally at that point. It becomes a more of a bigger picture thing, but that varies from place to place. But it's good to, once you start your job, to get a lay of the land, to know what possibilities are out there. And I agree. I think the research scientist person who can be in the lab and help out is phenomenally. It's a great mix. Um, there may be some other roles like that can also be really helpful. So um, lab managers can be other sort of force amplifiers. A really good lab manager is worth their weight in gold. Data scientists are a new emerging thing, or engineers that can do a lot of like programming of tasks or manning rigs. Bernali, do you have an engineer or someone that works in your lab with you?
Yeah, I have a lab manager, and his background is in well, machine learning essentially. So not necessarily engineering, but data science stuff. And then I taught him how to use the rig. So he's phenomenal, records all our data, and I really trust him with patients. Good personality, good with the patients. So he's kind of the backbone. And then I have a postdoc more recently now that has joined.
Can I chime in here too?
Yeah.
And what you said, like about being good with patients, that's key for those of us doing like human research. Because there's nothing worse than like hiring a brilliant engineer who doesn't get along with anybody, who, anger your patient and kind of, yeah, muddle the only lifeline you have. So,
Mhm.
and there's a question in the chat. Do you want us to address it?
Yeah, sure. So it looks like Trevor Wynn from UT Southwestern has a question. Do you all consider it valid that a neurologist can do the same research? Um, yeah, I think that in principle, I think there's nothing sacrosanct about a neurosurgeon that makes us beyond other people. But I do think what differentiates us may be our access to patients and our training that gives us a unique perspective on what the problems are that you think about differently if you are a neurologist or radiologist, which is why we have these different subspecialties. And I think that there's a perspective that a neurologist has that I don't, which might make them better at certain types of research that they do that I can't. And I hope that I can do something unique as a neurosurgeon, or at least approach things from a different perspective that makes my research valuable. Not sure what other people think about that.
Yeah, I think, if you're doing any device related work, human neurophysiology work, we definitely have, better access than neurologists, right? Neurologists can come up with all these ideas, but it's still up to the surgeon to get the data if it's intracranial or invasive. So it gives us a unique edge, I think, in terms of competitiveness for grants and this access. And I mean, it's kind of cool from like, seeing a patient I see in clinic, implanting investigational devices in them and then translating into therapy, like with a one-stop shop. Whereas like you can certainly do it, but with other PIs and teams, just requires a little bit more collaboration.
And then another question I had is a sort of prompt, like maybe I'll ask this of Dario. Dario, do you think there's any, or if you were like at the department chair level, would you ever, what sort of situation would make you want to say maybe we should not, or revisit this idea of protected time for this individual person? Like what are you doing so right that you're not worried about that ever happening, and what would make that change, I guess?
I'm fortunate to not be at that level yet, like Greg. I don't know. It's a challenging decision. I'm in a very clinical department, very different from like an MGB or a UCSF, right? So we're a very financially driven department, so it's kind of a sacrifice and a privilege to be able to let me do some research time. It's I really think you need to make a mission for like what you want to do as a department, and I think you need to pick people who will at least keep the boat afloat. And financially, it becomes advantageous because you drive smart people to your department as faculty, right? Because that person's not like as we've all said, like I'm 60% grant NIH, and that pays 60% of the NIH cap. So that does not pay me much. It does not pay the department much. So you really need to invest in the idea of what you're accomplishing, what you want to do as a department, what your mission is, and the the profit ends up being in driving patients, driving faculty to your department, I think. Um, so yeah, I haven't, as you said, I'm not at that level as a department chair to make that decision, but I would hope to, as Greg has, and as your chair has, and as Doris's chair has, uh, really make that a priority and realize that in the long term, it's financially beneficial because of the attention, the scores, and what it brings to the department, I think.
Mhm. Have you, you, Doris, have you ever had to kind of justify the amount of time you're doing on research, ever, besides just doing good work?
Luckily not. But I feel like I've been fortunate enough to get just enough grants to kind of support my time. Um, yeah, definitely now I'm sure all of us have been stressing out with, the funding situation in terms of how sustainable that's going to be. Yeah, well, we'll see. I mean, that future is definitely worrisome. And unfortunately, like when people, like graduate students, ask me for advice, like, should I go into postdoc versus industry? I can't, in good conscience, like advise them for this path right now, just given the uncertainty. But hopefully things will swing, back. Yeah, wish things could change, and they could. But yeah, it's like really challenging now.
Mhm.
But can I comment on that?
Of course.
I would, for someone who's been doing this for a while, 2 decades, there's a pendulum. It swings back and forth, and we are swinging low right now, obviously, but it'll swing back. And it's happened in the past. It'll happen again. So I would be optimistic that you can do this. And what I would say, and because I've lived it in the past where there was a downswing, where when there is a downswing, what the NIH does is they will make sure that the early stage investigators and the career development people, they will make sure that's where the funds are going to go because they know. And I've talked to program officers, I've talked to the Tish Wygand, who's the current head of the NINDS K Award and Career Development Award. They know that if they don't fund the junior investigator and the career development people now, they're going to lose a whole generation of scientists. And then when the pendulum swings back, there's a whole loss. There's nobody to fill in. So I would be optimistic. It's tough, but research is tough. You heard, Sean, who's one of the best there is, 1 in 6. It's tough. But I wouldn't change my career plans based on what's happening in the present day because it'll shift back. Now, I do believe that your approach to funding your own research program needs to change, and you need to be. And I am doing it in my own lab. I never talk. I mean, it's been years since I talked about going for anything other than a federal grant. But now I'm doing it. I am looking. Putting in grants for foundations and even local grants in a way that I just didn't do before because of the environment we're in. And I also think looking in philanthropy and looking for industry partnerships, especially all the functional people, I think there's going to be opportunities for that kind of thing. So I think you need to diversify your approach to funding your research program, but I wouldn't lose hope based on, the last 9 months. It'll swing back.
I'm banking on it. Yeah. Sell high, sell or buy low, sell high. Sean, have you had to do any like painful sort of compromises or like say no to something in order to make sure you had enough time to do either more clinical work or more research work? Like any notable times where you had to make that sacrifice?
The question is which example to give, right? It's countless. Yeah. So yes. Um, uh, yes. So things like all good opportunities aren't timely, right? Like you can't do all the things that you even want to do after a point in time, right? Um, there are meetings, right? You're talking about in what scale, right? So a recent example is like many people on this call probably went to, this nice academy meeting in Greece. I like really wanted to go to that meeting, but I really needed to, like, the California Institute of Regenerative Medicine grants are due in a couple of days. I needed to stay home and write my portion of that grant. So I literally canceled my flight, canceled my hotel, and sat home last weekend and Friday and last weekend. And I like finished the whole thing, right? So yeah, it's countless, man.
Well, that
Like
makes
you
me feel
can,
better. Thank you.
yeah, yeah.
Got it. Do you maybe this is for Bernali. Do you think that with stuff that's happening in the future, like more AI or more um, remote collaboration, do you think protected time is changing at all, or do you think it's going to be exactly the same as it is now?
Um, I mean, AI can only get you so far. I mean, I think that like the PI's role and the protected time is the same. Like, the ideas are from the PI and you have to write like the bare bones of a grant or paper. I think that like grad students can be faster at doing what they need to do now with AI and writing code. Like when I first started my job, I was like, I can't hire anyone that doesn't know how to code. But I guess people can just chat GPT the code and it looks fairly reasonable. So I think AI's sped up as it has with other industries, the sort of entry level people and increase their understanding faster. There's really no excuse why they don't know something factual now. So that's better and they can be a little more useful earlier. But I think our like the PI's protected time, I still need to like read papers and spend time doing that while I'm still conscious, my waking hours. So I think that's the same.
Mhm. Anyone else see any like trends on the horizon besides we already talked about funding difficulties and maybe a resurgence of philanthropic funding. My lab has now most of our funding from philanthropic stuff on top of the NIH things just because of the uncertainty and the new availability of these funds. But any other kind of like sea changes that might be affecting us as clinician scientists?
John, why don't you give us advice on that? I've got a little bit of philanthropic support, but it's clear at least we talk about these trends and waves, and hopefully in a few years it'll move back. But right now, I think the way to keep things funded is going to be a lot based on philanthropic support. So, how have you succeeded on that?
Yeah, so we've been doing a lot more like team science, which I think is something that I did not see a lot of as a graduate student doing my MD PhD. But I'm seeing a lot more, and even I think like Eddie and Phil Starr were good examples of this earlier on, like building these big consortiums of people to do really exciting things. And there are many large philanthropy type organizations or individuals who believe in these missions of developing big teams. So we were fortunate, thanks to working with great people like Mike Fox here and Andy Horn, to go in on some projects like the Rainer Cerebellum Project and the BD Squared Project, which are parallel to the conventional NIH funding mechanisms, which are still really excellent and kind of one of the gold standards. But But I think being open to those and trying to swing bigger for these things has really been helpful for us. Although it does with that comes a lot of like there's a lot of moving parts for these bigger projects that take a lot of coordination across people and labs, and that's where hiring. We just hired a new program manager for our lab, which is like just a godsend, someone to be there and actually make sure all the bits and pieces are moving, because it's getting to the point where it's one person like me can't monitor all that. Um, yeah, but so I think you have to cast a wide net, diversify your portfolio. That's probably been true all along, but more acute nowadays. All right.
I have some advice on philanthropy. Would that be okay?
Oh yeah.
So I think that I think it takes intentionality. I think you really have to think about it. And I think you know, from a faculty perspective, I think really leaning into your patients and if you glean something, or hear something in a clinic, or I'm thankful, or you gave me my life back, or transformative, or these things. You need to act on that. Now, different people have different ways of acting on that. My experience, there's a rare physician who's good at individually fundraising themselves and doing philanthropy and asking for a patient for money. I've never asked a patient for money in my life, and I'm not comfortable doing it. But I do have my antenna up. I do relay that to my advancement officer. I do, have an elevator pitch ready, when something comes up, or an advancement officer after an initial meeting wants another meeting with the patient or the patient's family and me, and we can show them. Like, you got to be ready for that kind of thing, and you need to work closely with your advancement officer. There are most places who are serious about this. There are classes that you can take to learn some of this stuff, and you can hear the clues and hear what you should say. You should never say no problem. No, this. Well, it took a team. You know what I mean. Like, there's a way to respond when someone says thank you, and you changed my life. And is there anything? Is there ever and whatever. I mean, there's a way to respond to that stuff, and being ready for that is important. So one is that, and then the other one is working with your chair. Usually, the chairs, this is part of their job, is to do this, and so employ them. They can say John is the best functional neurosurgeon and is doing amazing research in a way that if John said that, it would be off-putting, but when the chair says that, it sounds believable, and John looks like a humble, incredible scientist, and that works really, really well. And then then the advancement officer will ultimately make the ask, and that's their job because they're really good at it. So those are my pieces of advice. If there's classes or some instruction, or talk to someone in your department who's done well with it, learn the ropes. Most of the time, it's not asking for money yourself. It's feeding the name to somebody who is a professional, and then work with your chair, whose job is to raise money for the department, raise money for different programs. And I think with that approach, you can be successful with philanthropy. And I do think it's more important now than ever. At the same time, I think the donor population out there knows this. The more sophisticated ones know this. They know that the federal funding's changing, and to some degree, they're motivated by they can help keep things moving, where federal dollars are not going to do that, at least for the next couple of years.
Can I chime in? And those are great comments. In my experience, the philanthropic support comes in two flavors. One is the grateful patient that will contribute several hundred or several $1,000s, with or without the assistance of your advancement officer. And then the others are the big gifts that come every few years. So every year, I put together, twice a year, I put together a newsletter from my lab. I do this in the winter, like right end of the year giving, so right around the middle of November. And then there's a spring newsletter. And it's like the three things that we've learned. Like, these are the three things. Thank you. A lot of it, especially, certainly in the first like 5-10 years, was all about like, this is how your partnership helped me as an early career person. Like that resonated a lot with people. And on average, I got between collectively 25 to $75,000 a year in that pot from probably like 25 to 30 different people contributed to that. But that's not zero money. That's actually a neat, nice little pot of extra money, is certainly early in the career. I've also had about every other year, over the last few years, a gift of roughly $2 million. This is the Bay Area, keep in mind. And there are a number of people who can give to that capacity. And that is absolutely in collaboration with the Advancement Office and their special pitches, proposals put together. It's basically a whole nother grant, but written in a completely different way. And it's about impact, and this is how it's going to help people, and all of those sort of things, and meetings and dinners. But yeah, I think most labs that I'm familiar with at UCSF have at least an equal or greater amount of philanthropic support as NIH funding in this day and age. But I think they come in those two flavors in my experience.
Mhm. That's great. So we only have a few more minutes, but there's a couple more questions in the chat. So I'll do AJ's first, and we'll try to knock these out and get everyone off to their families again. So the last couple questions. One is from AJ asking, kind of alluding to protected time during residency. And that is another level of difficulty. Your schedule is dictated by the program, and that is not something that's really negotiable. But you can find ways to hold yourself accountable to research goals. Because you know that performing research will help your career as an academic neurosurgeon. So having that background, learning those new skills is important. The time to focus on that is if your residency has a dedicated research year or two, that is obviously a great time to work on it. Otherwise, you can try to focus on maybe some clinical projects during the first years where those are more tractable than going to the lab and pipetting, for instance. But there's no great way to do it other than trying to forge ahead and learning from all the smart people around you as much as you can during those precious years you have. And then the last one is from Jingnes Taylor. I currently have a 50-50 schedule and take a call on one of my clinical days. However, I find that protected research days are often taken over by cases that come in on call. Any advice on how to structure calls so that cases don't bleed into research time? Um, that's a great question. So when I started, I had my call day as one of my research days, which I just thought was not really compatible with what I wanted to do. So I ended up moving it to my normal OR day. So then if I had an emergent case, I would be able to add it on at the end of the day. So it made for my OR days to be longer. But they're already like, kind of a wash for research anyway. Um, I mean, it's hard when you start accumulating lots of cases. You have to take care of those patients. You owe it to them. It's going to bleed into some of that research time. Maybe if you had it on a clinic day or some other way to kind of, because it's sometimes easier to sneak out in a clinic to do a quick case. Not sure if anyone else has any good ideas about how to manage the call and emergent case type thing. Dario, you look like you've mastered it very well, but
Yeah. We've got I'm in functional neurosurgery. We've got three of us. We will take care of each other's stuff if we are busy. Obviously, we do whatever we can to take care of our own patient, but we're very, very low threshold um, to just take care of a infection or take back or so. I think that's one thing. If you're fortunate to have partners that you can set up that kind of scenario, that's one way to do it, obviously. Um, but I do think it's kind of like if you're going to be a neurosurgeon scientist, it's like you said, you're not going to not take care of that person. So it's almost like that's the one thing that's going to always hang over your head. I mean, those are your patients. If you take on a patient, that's your patient. Other than sharing it with somebody else, I don't I don't know that there's another solution.
Do any of you cluster call? So like take, 3 or 4 call at a time so that you have a period of like 2, 3 weeks where you don't take call. Is that a good strategy for an academic neurosurgeon, or does it not matter?
I I think, yeah, if it depends on the call and what is it like, right? Like when I started, I took trauma call at the county. The nice thing is of that, it's like it's very protected. So I'm just there for the weekend, round on the weekend, but then any patient I inherit, it goes to somebody else come Monday. So yeah, there's call is annoying, but we all do it, especially to your own patients. But I would almost say like, yes, it's more intense and like you can't get anything done. You even see your family on those weekends, but at least it's contained, kind of like a shift work, essentially.
Yeah.
Bernali, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean I agree with Doris. We have like weekend call, so I take call every like seventh weekend, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and then it's kind of a sprinkling during the week, but it's not a lot. And I also echo Dario in that I have amazing partners. So if it's not like a DBS issue, if it's like, something else, a lot of times my partners will help me out if I like have to go do something for research or, whatever study section or something. So they understand, and I think that's part of like department culture, that I think my partners actually, they understand I have to do some research and they're on board with the mission, and that I'm really lucky. And so if you can get your partners sort of buy in, like, oh, she's got to go do this thing. So it's nice. And so if you could manage that, that would be ideal.
Yeah. Well, one thing I've seen work well is at Emory, Bob Gross, and I think he learned this from his fellowship in Canada, was that they would do a week clinical and a week research, which might be getting to Dr. Taylor's thought about kind of clustering things. So that they would do like all their clinical responsibilities, all the surgery, if they had any call on one week. So usually if the things happen, you're kind of done dealing with the fallout for that by maybe next Monday or so. And then you have the rest of the week just free for research and academic stuff. Um, I subscribe more to Sean's idea about having like, consistent, like, Monday is always surgery, Tuesday is always this, which works better for me. But I think you have to kind of try these different ways out and see which one works best for you. So a lot of experimentation, which is something that we're good at with all that protected time. So with that, we're a few minutes over, but thank you, Sean, Dario, Bernali, Doris, and Greg, and Sophie, and everyone for these things. These are such great opportunities to learn from people. And thank you for organizing all this. And thanks, everyone, and have a good night.
Thanks, John. Thanks, everybody. Have a good night.
Thanks.
Thank